Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, O'Connor and Company.
And it's 8:37. Thanks for tuning into O'Connor and Company. 30 minutes now before you hand it off to Chris Plant. I'm Larry O'Connor with Patrice Onwuka. Good Friday to you, Patrice.
Yes, good Friday to you too, Larry.
I've been following this guy, James Fishback, recently quite a bit. His social media game is strong, as well as his traditional cable news appearances, and he's a very wise man. So, Patrice, take it away.
Absolutely. James, welcome.
Oh, good morning, Patrice. Good morning, Larry.
Good morning. Well, I mean, this week I think we've all been watching to see what the Federal Reserve would have done on interest rates, and generally, folks expected, economists expected that that the Fed would keep the rates steady, and they did, despite I think plenty of evidence, economic data that suggests the economy is strong, the labor market is not cratering, and inflation has moderated significantly. So there was a good case to be made for the Fed to lower rates, and they did not. And now you've announced just a day or two ago that you are doing something on behalf of all of American workers. Share this with our audience.
Yeah, I'm happy to. You know, the thing to remember here, Patrice, is that inflation is now at a 4-year low. Yes, this level of interest rates, this high, was appropriate when we had inflation of 8 to 9% a couple years ago under President Biden, after the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, after the post-COVID stimulus engendered this large wave of inflation. This level of rates that we still have is not appropriate for the fact that inflation has averaged 1.8% since the new administration took office. And so my investment firm, it's called Azoria, we sued Jerome Powell in federal court last week in an effort to bring some real transparency and accountability. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you own a home or not yet and you're currently renting, you deserve to know what is said in those Federal Reserve meetings. You deserve to know what is actually going into their equation that's keeping interest rates at 20-year highs and mortgage rates at 25-year highs. And so there's something called the Government in the Sunshine Act that Congress passed in 1976 that says that any federal agency, including the Fed, Patrice, has to meet within public observation, and those transcripts have to become readily available. And so we're taking Powell to court for the simple reason that every American deserves the dignity of knowing what the government is doing to them and the people they care about.
I love this. I do. Nothing like a lawsuit to get people to step up and fix their behavior, let's say. But what is the precedent for this sort of thing? Everybody talks about the independence of the Fed, and yet we pay for their salaries, we pay for their budget, we're paying for this, $3 billion renovation of their palatial offices, and so I mean they may be independent, I suppose. They're not. And by the way, the chair needs to be confirmed. All the members of the Fed are confirmed by the Senate, so they're not really independent, are they?
Right. That word independence gets thrown around. What it really means, Larry, is we want to be independent of accountability, oversight, and transparency. That's the issue here. I mean, right? It's not.
By the way, so do
politics.
I. If I may just, I would love that independence.
Right. And so, yes, of course, we all, Republican, Democrat, we all want the Fed to be independent of politics. We don't want Senator Elizabeth Warren, as she did in September of last year, telling Powell to cut rates by 75, even though the economy didn't warrant that. And we don't want a Republican president, one way or the other, making unjustified demands of the Federal Reserve. But I got to tell you, Donald Trump's economic analysis of the Fed is dead right. He understands that with inflation now at a 4-year low, inflation having come in better than expected 5 consecutive times so far this year, inflation that is now below the Fed's target, it doesn't make sense, Patrice, to keep interest rates this high. Now, why should we care about this? Interest rates, mortgage, why should we care? Because 360,000 fewer Americans got mortgages this year versus this time 4 years ago in President Trump's. So 360,000 people who are being denied the ability to get a home. If you can't get a mortgage, you can't get a home. If you can't get a home, you can't get married. If you can't get married, you can't have kids. And so this is literally a life-altering decision that the Federal Reserve is making, and none of us have a say in it. And we're not saying we need to go to the meetings and have a public comment session, although we'd love to see that. What we're saying is we deserve to know what is actually being said. The current setup, Patrice, is we will know, we're lucky to know what happens in that meeting when the Federal Reserve releases the transcripts, not in July 25 or July 26. We will get the transcripts of what was said in this week's meeting, I kid you not, in January 2031.
Oh, goodness.
And they justify that. They justify that with, quote, we don't want politics to interfere with our independence. Well, when you're allowed to hide for 5 years, we don't know if those meetings had political considerations. And I'm sorry, Jerome Powell is not beyond reproach. Jerome Powell is not somehow an apolitical, nonpartisan being when he comes out right before the 2024 election, cuts rates by 50 points, and what looks like a desperate attempt to help Vice President Harris. Oh, and now inflation is lower today than it was then. Every economic model says rates should be lowered, and he doesn't want to do a darn thing. This isn't just about President Trump. It's about the 360,000 Americans who deserve to get a mortgage. They've done everything right. They put their head down. They worked hard. They saved up. But Jerome Powell can't get off his anti-Trump high horse and do the right thing.
We're speaking with James Fishback. You're head of the investment firm Azoria. You're suing Jerome Powell. You made an interesting point about what President Trump could do when it comes to Powell himself. You know, we're not expecting President Trump to fire him, but what could he do that you think would change the markets and really impact the bond markets, pretty much every market that's having it, that's deciding, you know, what's going on with the different rates, the mortgage rates, et cetera?
Yes, absolutely. So for background, I was an interest rate derivatives trader for the last 10 years. So I've watched every single Fed meeting since 2011, read every single Fed transcript that's publicly available through 2019. This was my full-time job. So I've thought a lot about how the Fed shapes market expectations. And I understand the urge, despite everything that we've said, I understand the urge to want to fire Jerome Powell. He's a little scoundrel, but I don't want President Trump to take the bait because I don't want them to have another pretext to try to impeach him. I don't want there to be a long, drawn-out fight with the Supreme Court. There's a very simple solution, Patrice, and that is for President Trump on Monday morning to announce who will replace Jerome Powell. The second he does that, Jerome Powell loses all of his influence and credibility in the eyes of the bond market. Everyone, every trader, every investment firm will look to Scott Bessent and will reprice Treasury rates lower and mortgage rates lower accordingly. Here's a perfect analogy, I think, to think about it. When Joe Biden was technically still the president after Trump won in November of 24, no one really wanted to talk to Biden. There was no world leader who was clamoring for a meeting, no CEO who wanted to spend time with him. Everybody rushed down to Mar-a-Lago. I was down there. Everyone rushed down there. And the reason why is because even though Biden was technically the president, Trump was really the one who had credibility and legitimacy in the eyes of the public. Same thing happens here. Even though Powell would still technically be the Fed chair through May 2026, what Scott Bessent could do is he could become the shadow Fed chair. He would give speeches all over the country. He would tell the bond market, when I take office in May of 26, I'm going to cut those rates and buy a lot. And the bond market, because it's a market based on forward-looking expectations, Patrice, it will have no other option but to mechanically price those expectations. And that lowers mortgage rates and Treasury rates, not in May, it lowers them today because the market is an amalgamation of all future rates at the current present point.
Fantastic.
James Fishback, Azoria Partners. And by the way, I mean, I've been watching a lot of what you've been doing. You're fighting the good fight against the ideological monopoly that the left has in our public schools, and you're trying to push for viewpoint diversity. And did I read this right? You've got a publicly traded fund now, an exchange fund, and you're donating 5% of your personal profits to pro-life pregnancy centers across the country?
I am, and I'm proud to do it. I'm proud to play a small part in this movement. The movement that says that every life matters, that the preborn are the most vulnerable among us, and no mother should be pulled aside and said, now is not the right time for you to be pregnant. No mom, no teenager should be pulled aside and say, now is not the right time for you to have a baby. Our communities, our faith-based centers are stepping up in a way that the government hasn't to ensure that every mom, every expecting mom has the resources she needs. That fund that you mentioned, Larry, is actually the first of its kind. It's an anti-DEI ETF. The ticker is FBXM. And the way it works is it buys the same companies in your S&P 500 ETF, except the 38, Starbucks, Nike, Airbnb, and others that have explicit DEI quotas that we have found hurt stock performance. And so you get to own the same S&P 500 stocks in the same exact weightings, with the exception of the stocks that are holding you back and doing the wrong things. I mean, to tell you the truth, Patrice, I don't see how a company can outperform or can do well in the market if it's hiring on race and gender versus skill and merit. And so the Azoria Meritocracy ETF, the ticker there is SPXM, Patrice. It just invests in companies that hire on merit. It's our anti-DEI ETF. I got to tell you, we launched this thing 3 weeks ago. We just hit $40 million yesterday. So people are really taking it in.
Congratulations.
Impressive figure, James Fishback. But don't be a stranger. We want to talk to you again. Good stuff, man.
Thanks, James. This is great.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Patrice.